The issue really is that traditional winemaking has always been very rustic. People literally use stone troughs, they crush grapes, they collect the juice, and they crush many different kinds of grapes together. That the use of barrels to mature wines in a more controlled environment is a relatively new idea. Though the Romans were utilizing barrels 2,000 years ago, they were doing it mostly for transport. Amphorae, clay vessels, were actually very good aging vessels, but they don't transport well. And here people mostly used goat skins, cow skins, mole skins, and those aren't very good vessels for long-term aging. So barrels arrive here in the mid-19th century, and the French bring them along because the French are fleeing from phylloxera, this microscopic bug that's destroying all the vines in France. They come here because they've been selling some barrels here. So it's just across the Pyrenees, it's not so far, and they begin teaching people how to make wine here. And in the mid-19th century, the way to make wine is to leave it in barrel for a long time. You do that because it softens the wine, and the wines are very acid, very tart, because people are harvesting them too soon, because people can't trust the weather to cooperate, so they end up harvesting most of their grapes too soon. It's just the best way to make sure you have a crop. They plant red and white grapes together, they blend them all together, very different than today, and then they age them in barrel a long time. That is the old traditional method of winemaking in Rioja. It was once upon a time the way to make wine in Bordeaux, but that changed several decades ago. In Rioja, you can still find it. The idea of a Gran Reserva is the most exalted of this kind of wine. It's a wine that's been in barrel for a long time, and most wines that were in barrel for a long time didn't get better, but some wines did. Those wines were called Gran Reserva because they were the very special wines that have been in barrel for a long time. Today, you only need to have that wine in barrel for 2 or 3 years. But traditionally, that wine was in barrel for 10 or 20 years. Very different than today. So today, we make wines that aren't in barrel as long. The grapes are properly ripened, and they're very fresh, and they're very fruity. And that's what the market wants today. But there's also another school that wants bigger, more robust wines. So instead of the traditional old American oak barrels, they use brand new French oak barrels. They ripen the grapes even longer so that they're very powerful. They're higher in alcohol, typically. So these are the different kinds of schools of winemaking that exist today in Rioja. Once upon a time, those wine schools existed everywhere else, but virtually only in Rioja do they all coexist today. The notion of leaving a wine in barrel for more than 5 years is now discredited by most regions. Bordeaux stopped doing that certainly in 1982, if not before. Through the 70s, they were transitioning away from long aging in barrel. Here in Rioja, there are still people that do that. And it makes a unique character to the wine. The wines become very soft, very supple. They're not fresh and fruity. They're more earthy and more savory than they are fruity. For the international market, that's difficult to sell, but I'm a big believer in Gran Reserva because there's nothing like it on earth, and it speaks directly of this place, and this is why we value wines, because they can express an individual place. Where I always begin with anyone starting in wine tasting. Begin to understand what you like and why it's different from what other people like. We're not supposed to like the same things. We don't like the same things when it comes to food because our palates are slightly different, because what we smell is slightly different. So what I try to beg people to do is, before you worry about facts and figures, before you worry about histories and traditions, taste. Develop some experience with what this tastes like versus what that tastes like. To you, accepting that it's going to be slightly different, it's very individualistic. And I think that's a difficult concept for beginners to relate to. We want to know what's the truth, you know, what can I rely upon? And the answer is, you rely upon this, just as we do when we eat every day. No, I think you need it all. The smell is probably 3/4 of the information, but the texture is a very important part of the information. I think you want it all. And I think what's interesting is that everyone's path is slightly different. So for some people, texture becomes very important. For some people, smell becomes very important. For some people, savory is more important than fruity, and everybody is slightly different. It was something that I almost did by accident. I was trying to become an MW, and then I discovered the Master Sommelier program sort of by accident, and suddenly thought, oh, well, these are my people too, you know? I come from the restaurant business. I started it when I was 15 years old, and I've always loved to write. And so it was as if both exams were appropriate for me, simply because those were the things I loved doing, and those were the things that I wanted to do more.
Yeah.